Hello, folks. In this video, we're going to take a look at how to start playing solos on the ukulele. You know, like a blues solo or a rock solo, something like that. When we're thinking of playing solos, we might think about cramming as many notes as we possibly can into a short amount of time. And while that can be fun, that's really not the best place to start. When I was first learning how to play leads on guitar, I was pretty focused on scales. I may have been getting ahead of myself, though. Instead of thinking about scales, I want to start off by thinking about the chords. Last week I recorded a video on Route 66, and it's a great little 12-bar blues form, so we're going to use that basic form as our example today. You don't need to see that video to get something out of this video, but if you want a little bit of context, or if you want it, think of it as a real song as opposed to just a progression to practice over, this is essentially Route 66. So let's start off by playing through a little bit of the progression just as chords. So the three chords that we have in this song are A7, D7, and E7. And you'll see in the handouts either blues in A or the blues in A solo ideas PDFs. We'll see what the structure looks like. But let's walk through it together. I'm going to play this backing track that I made for us to play along with. Okay, so we begin this on our A7 chord, so I'm going to get ready for that with the count in here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Switch to D7, back to A. D7. E7, D7, and back to A7. And it starts back over. And that is the structure of the song. I've kept everything pretty simple in terms of arrangement and everything like that. We've got a little bit of the chords that you can hear in that backing track, a walking bass line, and a very simple drum pattern. So not a lot to get distracted by, so we can just focus on the things that we want to hear. Now, as I said, a lot of times when we think about a solo, we think about shredding and, playing as fast as we can. But I don't really want to focus on that. I want to start off with just one note. And in this case, we're going to use the A string here. Okay, so the first thing that I want you to do is just try playing a solo with just that one note. You can play any rhythm that you want. You can get as fast or as mellow or as groovy as you want to, but the first rule is to only play with one string. So we're just kind of figuring out how to tell our story just with rhythm, as opposed to worrying about where we're going next. And the reason that I picked this A note is that it is a very important note in both the A chord and the D7 chord. And even though it isn't in the E7 chord, it's still going to have a neat texture on top of that chord. So it might sound a little bit dissonant, but seventh chords, that transition, that E7 is supposed to have a little bit of tension that is going to be released. So let's try that. I'm just going to play an example, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to make this up on the spot. So let's see what happens with my one-note solo all on the open A string. Second time through. course, I could keep experimenting with that, coming up with different ideas. A lot of times when you're playing something, you have a couple times to go through. You can kind of like figure out, oh, that sounded really cool. I want to come back to that, or you know, you might create a little motif in your solo where it's like, oh, I really like, you know, leading into a chord with, you know, leading into a change with something like that, and that rhythmic phrase there can be a very distinct thing. So it's a really nice place to start. And do consider that as like a serious thing. You could come up with a really interesting rhythm that later on you can flesh out with other notes, but where you can just focus on that rhythm and locking in with a song and really feeling the changes and playing off of what's going on in the song is something that takes time. And if we can kind of eliminate some of the other distractions, the, you know, where do my fingers go or what key are we in, if we can eliminate a lot of that stuff, we can really start connecting with the music quickly. The next thing that we can try is we can change notes throughout the song, you know, throughout our solo, but we can only use tones that appear in the chord. So if I look at that blues in A chart that we've got the tablature written out for each of those chords every time it happens. So for that A7 chord right at the beginning, I have 4 distinct notes that I could play for my solo. I've got 4 different chord tones here. I've got my open G, first fret of the C, open E, and open A. All of those notes are at my disposal for that chord. Now, you know, as we get more advanced, we can throw in notes that aren't in that chord. But again, this is part of the exercise. For now, we are just focused on notes that appear in that chord. So during an A chord, I could bounce it back and forth between any of those notes that appear in that A7 chord. So I could come up with a little rhythmic idea, bouncing between a couple notes. You know, I could arpeggiate those chords a little bit. Like so. I've got the D7 chord. All right. So I've got any of those notes that I could play. And the E7 chord occurs pretty quickly, but these are the notes that I could play. From that chord. So I'm going to do it. Again, I don't know what I'm going to do. I am going to just be picking notes from each one of those chords, from that root position chord shape. So from only notes in A7 as they appear in this chord shape, likewise as they appear in this D7 and in this E7. So I'm going to hit play, and we'll see what happens. 1, 2, 3, 4. Already I'm breaking the rules. All right, we'll come back around. 2, 3. We're coming back to the beginning of it. Stick to the rules, Squeak. rolling with this. You never know what's going to happen. You can see I'm kind of like finding little melodic ideas in little pairs of the strings. Kind of like rocking back and forth just on my A and E strings and playing the notes that occur for each chord on those strings. I'm going to do it again here for the E7. And that's just notes that are built in to those chords. Already I'm, this very simple, I'm kind of figuring out what I like as I go, One more time. And there we go. With Squeak's help, we just managed to play a solo using only chord tones for that blues in A. And you heard plenty of mistakes in there. That's totally fine. It's going to be very, very common when you are, especially if you're improvising a lead. You're going to hit some notes, and you're just going to have to roll with it, and that's okay. If a cat jumps up in front of your camera, so be it. Okay, so we looked at playing single note throughout the entire piece. We looked at playing chord tones as they appear in our chord voicings that look like this. Now I want to try and look for chord tones that we might have to stretch outside of this shape. So for instance, see if we can find some other places on the ukulele that we can play an A note, an E note, a C sharp note, or a G note when it comes to that A7. For the D7 chord, see if we can find maybe another place to play a D note, an F sharp note, a C note, or an A note. And for the E7, E, G sharp, B, and D. Those are the notes that I'm looking for there. Now, there's a document called Blues in A Solo Ideas, which covers not only some ideas for playing notes in those that first position, down here, but the second page is all about notes that we can find elsewhere on the ukulele. So, for instance, the 12th fret of my A string is another A note. So that one's great. The 10th fret of my A string is a G note. I've got the 12th fret of my E string, which is another E note. Just an octave higher. And then the 9th fret of my E string is a C sharp note. So all those notes that I just played, it's measure 13, the first measure on page 2 of this PDF, is this kind of melodic phrase that spells out an A7 chord. Let's see if I can play through what I've got written here in this example. So this is titled Chord Tones Around the Fretboard. Now, the idea with all of these examples is not to say, hey, this is a thing. This is just to kind of show you some different places that you can go. And as you get more and more comfortable with each little idea, you can start expanding from there. But the main thing is start off trying out solos based on notes within the chord. That is going to be an excellent place to get you started. Of course, there's plenty of room for growth from there, but if you can get that out of the way, even just playing our chords, you can like kind of improvise a solo, just selecting different notes from the chord that you're strumming along with. Let's do a little bit of that. I threw in a couple notes there. I want to talk about what each of those were. So at the end there, when I did my A7, I grabbed the 3rd fret of the E string. You can bend it a little bit. It can sound kind of bluesy. And then when I was playing that D7 chord, I was throwing in the 3rd fret of the A string. Again, creating a little bit of movement in there. This is still a chord tone, so I'm not breaking out of the D7 chord there. I am just swapping out chord tones in certain places. Now, another thing that we can do is we can play passing tones. So we can play notes that connect chord tones. So these could be scale tones in between, or they could just be any notes in between one note from a chord and another note from that same chord. So I have an example of this on that PDF, that Solo Ideas PDF, and the section is titled Passing Tones. And this is what that section sounds like. Improvise off of that. We can practice just playing that example. But the idea is that we can, as long as we're resting, as long as we're like hanging on notes in the chord, it's going to work. It's going to sound good. That doesn't mean that you can't hang on notes that aren't in the chord, but it is a less safe bet doing it that way. If you land on a note that is in the chord, you're in a safe place. As you can probably imagine, there are a lot more places that we can go with this, but start here. Start simply. Start by seeing what you can do with just a few notes before you start going crazy and adding in a whole bunch of other notes. I bet you'll come up with some really interesting stuff that's not going to be that hard to play, and it's going to be really fun to bust out when you're playing with a group. I hope you found this lesson helpful. Let me know if you have any questions. Email me at tinyvillagemusic@gmail.com. There's information in the description if you want to sign up for the mailing list and get all the stuff that I send out, PDFs, MP3s, any additional materials that you might need for a piece. Stay well, keep on strumming, and I'll talk to you in the next video.